Great. Welcome everyone to today's webinar on preparing for AI in the business process outsourcing and information technology enabled services sector in Africa. This was a report and a research that was launched a few weeks ago, conducted by Caribou Digital in partnership with Genesis Analytics and in partnership with the Mastercard Foundation. My colleague Grace from Caribou will post the link to the report for anyone who's not read the report before, and you can be able to look at the report later. My name is Charlene Migwe from Caribou Digital. I am the program director of the Mastercard Foundation Caribou Learning Partnership that explores the role of digital in youth livelihoods through research and advisory. We're hoping to have a vibrant discussion today. We will start with an overview of the report findings, panel discussions with industry experts we have in the room, and then have a Q&A session to hear from all of you and can have a vibrant discussion. Please put in your questions in the chat and we can have the panelists answer all your questions, and the Caribou team will be managing the chat as we go. To kick us off, we're really excited to have Eunice Mudengi, the Senior Director, Acting Research and Learning from the Mastercard Foundation. Welcome, Eunice, for the opening remarks.
Thank you so much for the warm invitation and welcome, Charlene. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are today. It's really exciting to be here, and it's great to know that you are all as engaged on this agenda and interested in engaging with the findings of this report as we are. As Charlene mentioned, I work with the Mastercard Foundation in the research and learning team. And we're really excited about the discussion around preparing for AI in the business process outsourcing and information technology enabling sector in services sector in Africa. We've been working with Caribou Digital for, I think, over a decade now, generating evidence on digital issues that are of importance to young people in Africa. And so first, a huge thank you to Caribou, the entire Caribou team, Genesis Analytics, and the work that you did on this report and for organizing this webinar. And for everyone who's dialed in, we'd like to say a huge thank you to you for taking your time to join in the discussion. And we're looking forward to hearing from you on your perspectives on today's topic. Just a bit of background at the Mastercard Foundation. We have an ambitious strategy to enable 30 million young people to access dignified and fulfilling work by the year 2030. Of those 30 million, at least 70% should be young women. And as a result, we're very interested in what the opportunities might be in these sectors, in the BPO and IT enabling services sectors. And we think African youth are actually very uniquely positioned to leverage these opportunities. And so this research is important because it provides us with some insights about what we need to do collectively to be able to support them in accessing these opportunities. And as highlighted by the young people who participated in this study, many of them already view AI as a catalyst for professional growth and career advancement. And they're already looking for opportunities to master some of the AI technologies. And the path forward is really about how we can better prepare young people for the changes in job tasks and skills, how we can support them in upskilling and reskilling, and how we can support the environment, the enabling environment that will really catalyze the skills that they'll have gained and enable them to be able to fully thrive in these sectors. And so as we move forward with the webinar, and really excited to hear from the various panelists and what this means, and really thinking about what this means for young people, especially in Africa. It's clear that there is a potential for AI to drive the growth of the BPO sector. There is a potential to create new jobs and to improve the livelihoods of youth and young women in Africa. But it looks like this potential will really depend on whether the sector is able to grow in an inclusive, strategic, and sustainable way. And so we're looking to all of you to help us understand how we can do that collectively. So thank you, everyone. And back to you, Charlene.
Thank you, Eunice, for reminding us the great reminder on how this discussion fits into the broader ecosystem and what it means for the African continent. And to move on, I think we could now get into the insights and look at the findings and see, as we open up for the panel, what it really means for the sector, the methodology we used, and then we could deep dive into the panel discussions. So I think it's over to Grace to share the screen as we discuss the research findings. And just to reiterate what Eunice has mentioned, the why for the research was there was a gap in the nuanced analysis that examines implications of AI adoption in the BPO and IT sector, with a particular focus on the sector's potential as a driver for youth employment. And as mentioned, the sector is a pathway to employment for youth and women. So the report really strives to ensure that sector players remain positions to deliver dignified employment for African youth at scale. So how we did it, we worked closely with Genesis Analytics, who are experts in the sector. First identified 4 job families that account for 80% of the roles in the sector. And this include customer experience, IT-enabled services, finance and accounting, and AI data services. The team then identified 36 key job roles and extracted 130 unique tasks across each sector. Each task category was assessed to determine its potential for automation and resilience to AI disruption over a 5-year horizon period. Over and above that data, we also collected first-hand experiences of young professionals in the sector as they navigate the complexities of working alongside AI-powered assistants and automation tools in countries such as Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. I think, Grace, your screen is very zoomed. Perfect. Just the next one previously. Yeah. And through this methodology, we came up with a number, looking at both the analysis that was done and also the first-hand experiences. With that, we found that 40% of the current tasks in African BPO and ITES sector are at risk of automation by 2030, given current AI capabilities. Some of the tasks that were identified was in the customer experience sector, where we see routine tasks such as frequently asked questions and transactional updates, which are being streamlined by chatbots and messaging platforms, or looking at tasks such as systems such as AI-driven voice systems, IVR that can automate basic tasks like call routing. Additionally, we found that junior roles and those predominantly held by women are more susceptible to automation. As Eunice had also mentioned, the sector is a pathway to employment for youth and women, and we know that women constitute a significant portion of the sector's workforce in many countries. So it does show that it is important for countries to act now to start thinking of what the impact of AI is in the sector and how to prepare youth for the future. So with all this, with the report and the data, we spoke to industry experts, speaking to the youth. It's clear that coordinated action and investments to ensure that more jobs in the sector are augmented by AI is needed. So looking at the majority of roles that need to adapt and build resilience. And if you look at the report, you'll be able to see a breakdown of how this happens. But luckily, in our discussions with experts and the youth, we see that work is already happening. We see that AI is already deeply integrated into the sector, driving efficiency innovation. For example, we see workers using tools like ChatGPT and in-house chatbots to enhance productivity, creativity, and accuracy. We see use cases such as coding, debugging, content generation, and supporting customer experiences, enabling employees to focus more on strategic problem solving, decision-making, and higher value tasks. But we also see Africa's youth recognize that AI will heavily influence the future of work. So there's already interest in that. And as a result, they see opportunities for career advancements. But some are still worried about the impact of AI on their jobs. Some worry that they might end up losing their jobs. But despite some of these worries, many young workers are optimistic, seeing AI as an enabler and believing that mastering AI technologies can lead to opportunities for growth and career advancements. With that said, and now as we think about the recommendations and what needs to be done to ensure that the sector remains positioned to deliver dignified employment for African youth at scale in the age of AI. You'll find 4 recommendations in the report. Upskilling is definitely non-negotiable, especially for women and entry-level workers. Issues of real-time labor data. As AI continues to evolve, as the sector evolves, we really do need actionable data so that all the initiatives that we're putting in place keep pace with the market demand. Looking at frameworks that bring together sustainable AI practices and safeguarding workers' rights while guiding the responsible and ethical deployment of AI across industries. And lastly, moving beyond cities. How do we look at AI hubs and rural investments beyond the cities where we're already seeing this happening to unlock new talent and to spread the opportunity beyond the cities? As I said, Grace, my colleague, has put a link to the report and you could look at it later, and we're happy to engage on that. But I'd like to welcome our partner, Genesis Analytics, JB, if you could come in. JB has over 20 years as a technology business builder and strategist, and is a digital livelihoods program director of Genesis. And will be giving us more context on the study and also more sector-specific information. Over to you, JB.
Sure. Thanks, Charlene, and happy to be here. Thanks everybody for joining. I think we've got a few slides, yeah?
Yeah.
About?
Grace?
Yeah, I mean, I can get going a little bit just to set context, right? So currently the global business services market globally, which encompasses IT-enabled services and BPO. BPO you can think of as a little bit lower level, IT-enabled services a little bit higher level. I'm radically simplifying, but that's the global business services market, right? It's about the latest figure I've seen is $1.5 trillion. In Africa as a continent, it's sitting at about 30 billion, 40 billion. It's not much. It's 2 to 3% of the entire, capturing 2 to 3% of the global demand. Contrast that with the fact that by 2050, I believe half of the world's working age population will be African. By 2045, it's the only continent whose working age population will actually be in the green, if you will, going up. Even Asia will be going down by then, right? So we have opportunity, we have urgency, we also have a growing sector. The GBS sector in Africa is currently growing 10% or more year over year. Globally, it's about 8%, right? And there's certain countries certain pockets where it's growing really fast. Are we doing slides? I can just keep rambling.
Sorry, John, keep going.
Yeah. I think there is a slide. There's not many slides, and they're quite simple. One of them basically shows, where global demand is being captured. I think it's around 36% in Asia still. And then, of course, Latin America captures a huge amount. North America actually does too, right? Sometimes it makes sense to outsource your work to the US, even with the cost disadvantages in the US. In Africa, I would say there are no more than 4 really mature locations. So South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, maybe Tunisia. You could throw in Mauritius in there if you want to count that. Certainly part of Africa, but it's a very different type of country. And they all are in excess of about $3 billion in revenue a year. And then you have your emerging countries in the sector that are sub 1 billion in revenue. So that would be Ghana, where Patrick does a lot of work. Nigeria, Kenya, certainly where I work most of the time. And Rwanda is absolutely in that group, where they have a sizable workforce, but really not a ton of players yet, and they're certainly not offering like a full stack of GBS services the way that a company like Infosys would, right? You have some companies that are offering CX, and Samir's worked in this industry for a long time. He can go into this, but you tend to more have like a company that specializes in just CX. When I say CX, it's customer experience, where the majority of youth in Africa are employed in the sector. That one's not for presentation. Yeah, next slide. There you go. And then the one just after that. Yeah, perfect. So we've just highlighted a few here. I know the Mastercard Foundation in particular is interested in these countries at the moment. But if you're looking at the mature markets for GBS, I would throw in Egypt into that, and Mauritius, and maybe Tunisia. And again, in those countries, you're seeing a huge breadth of GBS services. Whereas in Kenya, for example, I think 90% of workers that would be classified in this sector, are probably in like 3 or 4 companies. And in South Africa, just in Cape Town, sometimes you'll have 22 call center companies open up in a year, just in Cape Town. Right. So what you have going on is that the Africa case for GBS has certainly been proved out that it can happen on this continent and can be a very large industry. But there are a number of things that that governments and stakeholders need to do that we're going to talk about just to activate the sector. We obviously want to provide jobs to everyone. We want to do inclusive hiring, but you have to have a thriving economic sector in order to create jobs. And South Africa has done a great job of this, sort of bringing in impact sourcing programs alongside as the sector has grown over the years. We could do the next slide, and then I can hand back over to you if you want. I think AI, of course, is going to be wildly disruptive. It already is, but when we did the study, we tried to really emphasize the fact that we're not saying there's going to be a 40% job loss in Africa, right? I think because of global trends, and I would highlight when I talk to corp dev or COOs at companies that are looking at Africa seriously, of course it's about cost and it's about quality. Can I get the quality that I get in the Philippines at 10 to 15%, lower cost? But you also need business continuity. You have to have diversification. Actually, Africa helps a lot with that. The infrastructure now, especially in capital cities, is up to par. And then obviously you have time zone things that are very, very favorable for Africa. And then when I talk to CCI or Teleperformance, they're always saying, look, like, this big American telco or whatever it is, whatever company, they're really, there's a lot of cultural compatibility and affinity. Young people in Africa actually really understand the US quite well. The US may not understand them, but they understand it quite well. And the same thing with the UK. And so these are things that we're just highlighting and saying, these are really durable, right? These are incredibly durable things that will be there regardless of what happens with AI. And we know that attrition rates in Asia and in South Africa in particular are really, really high, 50, 60% turnover year over year. And in a lot of these countries, what I would say, in sort of the middle of Africa, right, from Ghana all the way over to Ethiopia, it's a greenfield opportunity, right? And so the industry continues to grow. I think Kenya's forecast to grow 18% year over year in the industry. Africa as a whole is, I think, slightly lower than that. But as we see jobs, there will be jobs eliminated. There'll be jobs created by AI. But there's absolutely a trend of higher costs in the Philippines, and that's going to, and in South Africa, you're going to see that come into other countries. But it's look, there's only 1 million people, around 1 million people in the industry on the entire continent. 2 million people just in the Philippines work in this industry. So that gives you a sense of the opportunity. Again, you're talking about 1 billion plus people over just 100 million people in the Philippines. So anyway, I'll stop there. and hand back over to you, Caribou.
Thank you, JB, for that reminder of there are opportunities for growth. How can Africa participate in that growth? And to broaden our discussions on the recommendations, we have a few industry experts in the room. We'll start with Samir Raina, Samir is the president and CEO of Digital Divide Data, a nonprofit enterprise creating sustainable jobs for economically and socially marginalized youth in Africa by creating and preparing datasets used in AI applications. We have Lorraine Charles, who is the founder and executive director of NAMAL, I hope I'm saying it right, which links forcibly displaced people with remote work opportunities. We have Patrick Morton, who's a regional CEO for South Asia, Middle East, and Africa of Our Generation, a global nonprofit focused on transforming education to employment systems. And we have David Go, who is the CEO and founding board member of Business Outsourcing Services Association of Ghana, who champions BPO, IT-enabled services, and GBS, advocating for industry growth across the continent. Thank you all for making the time to be here with us today. And I will start with Samir. And we're excited to have you in the room as a practitioner on the ground working in the sector. How is Digital Divide Data preparing its business and workforce for the opportunities and challenges that AI presents in the sector?
Thank you. Thank you, Charlene and John, for inviting me to this panel discussion. So just a bit about Digital Divide Data, or DDD. We've been around for about 25 years as a nonprofit BPO organization. So about 15 years in Africa, 25 years in total. And we've had some experience in navigating technology innovations, disruptions, and having to focus on upgrading and reinventing our skill stack for our employees over a period of time. And this whole thing, what to do with AI, how to think of this as a glass half full versus a glass half empty type mindset. It's been a common and frequent boardroom discussion for us. So just a second, let me increase the volume. This has been a common and frequent discussion for us, at the board level, and I'm sure for other organizations as well. So the way we have thought about this, or at least the way we're thinking about this, is how can we leverage AI to, first do, our internal operations better, enhance efficiency, drive innovations across different functions, and then also think of it as, okay, what can we do for our customers with enabling higher value services and elements of this nature. So the way we've bucketed our internal framework into 3 buckets as such. One was like, look, our legacy operations, which is prior state where you had no AI prior to, let's say, 2022, at least in our case, right? So I thought, okay, legacy operations were prior to 2022. Where we are right now is generalized AI for us, which is our current state, where we're using AI to support broad tasks across the organization. And the third bucket that we are making investments is that what does the future state look like, which will be business-specific tools, moving away from generalized AI to business-specific tools like things around HR, finance, sales, delivery, etc. Like, what are those tailored applications that we would be using for those parts? So again, coming back to our internal operations, again, they're around improving efficiency, enhancing accuracy, enabling scalability. Again, the thinking there being that, can we integrate AI into our organization to make us do things better, faster, more accurately, and so on? And this is sort of a combination of things to do with customer success, things to do with automating repetitive tasks, using AI for quality assurance, reducing human error, and more importantly, how can we scale our operations while being globally competitive? So like one of the things in Kenya, where we have our African headquarters, is how can we leverage the current tool set with AI to be able to, deliver, much more higher value services from Nairobi versus a tier 2 city, because, tier 2 city is probably 10 to 20% more cost effective, but we see Nairobi as a big hub for our talent and so on. So basically, how can we use AI to control our costs with our delivery workflows and so on? The second most, I would say, exciting initiative from my part is for employee growth, right? Basically, the whole upskilling, cross-skilling aspect of AI. So how do we empower our employees with continuous learning opportunities, career pathways in AI technologies? And this has to do more than sort of just saying, how can we use ChatGPT or one of these other LLMs to improve better work, but more importantly is what is that skill stack for the next 5 to 7 years that we need to build out that would enhance our employees' employability, whether it's within DDD or outside DDD. And second is basically around how can we make them, I would say, ready for the world from the perspective of even when they leave the organization, the skill set that they have, they can, be freelancers, they can do a bunch of different things, they could set up their own operations, all sorts of things. So, from a social impact perspective, with a nonprofit mission, our whole goal is around, skill stack relevance, where the market is going and so on. And the third part for us is new services for our customers. Like say, one of the things we've been thinking about is agentic AI applications. Like how do you invest in building out capabilities and services that your customers, would want for their business success, for their competitiveness, and so on. So for us, there are these 3 or 4 different types of aspects that we've been thinking about in terms of how we can leverage AI, to be more successful at an employee level, at a customer level, and be more relevant for the next, let's say 5 to 10 years, right? The biggest change for us is actually not so much the tools or the technology and all. The biggest challenge as such for us is around culture, changing the culture in the organization to be AI ready, AI first. You're seeing a lot of these buzzwords come out in the market. But for us is, how can we innovate at a faster pace to be ready for these things, to be, able to ride the wave as we were in sort of prior, technology cycles or prior, technology areas and so on. So that's a couple of different ways that, we've been thinking about things. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Samir. Just a quick follow-up question then. We're excited to see that one of the key recommendations was skilling and really thinking about the skill stacks. And exciting, something new that was come up is changing the culture in organizations to be AI ready. Could you touch a bit more on some of the challenges that you see, or some of the recommendations you could give for some of the people on the call who run BPO industries, companies who plan to start it? What does changing the culture really mean in an AI ready age? Yeah.
Yeah, so for us specifically, given that we are focused on the social side is basically, employability and workforce development, and using outsourcing as a mechanism to, increase the probability of employability for our associates that are primary part of our workforce. So changing the culture is, looking at things that say historically what has made us successful will not be, the assumptions that would make us successful going forward. So it includes everything from how do you embrace change and the pace of change. It includes, dealing with people's, I would say, anxiety about, they read all these news about all the jobs going away and what's the impact if you start using AI. If you need 20 people to do a certain job, then, are we going to use 17 people going forward and so on? I think with our youth, most of our employee population is in the ages of 22 to, let's say, 30, right? For them, our framing is that you have to embrace this. It's not optional, in the sense that, running away and pretending that change is not going to happen is not the answer. So We see the younger population more excited about, okay, what can you teach me? Or how can I learn things that I can then employ in my current job or use that to, find better opportunities as I graduate from DDD and so on. So we've tackled it from a tech skill set perspective, like we've made investments in teaching people Python or, low code, no code type things that let's go straight, we're not going to stop at landlines. We're going to go straight to mobile technologies, basically. The equivalent of that is, teaching people a set of tools in how to use AI and how to use agentic applications and how to use these next generation tools, and then having success use cases that'll help us, make sure that, okay, we are on the right track and, have these low-hanging success things around culture that'll impact our culture and so on. So we've taken that route that, look, we don't have all the answers. We are going to figure these things out as we go along. We've also made guarantees in the sense that we would not be laying off people because of the fact that, we now need less people to do the same job or something. Our goal is we will double down. We've made, about $2 million of investments in training and development with upskilling and cross-skilling and so on. It's not just about sort of the actual tools. It's also about mindset in terms of how to deal with change at the fast pace of change, how to keep up with, how things are happening. So we've made those investments. We've upgraded our L&D team to do these aspects. And then we're also sort of doing a couple of different things that are a little bit early to talk about in terms of how can we prepare people for, for this type of change and this type of AI opportunity. Kenya is, I think the furthest along across our operations compared to, say, Asia as well, primarily, again, because I think you mentioned employees are very technologically savvy. They have a strong grounding in English. So we see a lot more enthusiasm about embracing these types of things, which makes our job obviously a lot easier as well.
Yeah, thank you, Samir. Really great points on culture change and the investments needed to change culture and for the adoption of AI. And I'll move to Lorraine. And your ecosystem is somewhat different from Samir in terms of you work to connect underrepresented groups, such as refugees whose professional lives have been disrupted. And you try connect them to remote work opportunities. It'll be interesting to see your take on how AI is affecting opportunities for such underrepresented populations in the outsourcing sector, and some of the actions that you think are needed to protect existing opportunities for such groups.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And super interesting report. And I want to say ChatGPT gave me data from your report. I used ChatGPT Mini High, I think that's what it's called. Thanks to Elvis who's in the chat for talking about the different ChatGPTs. So I typed in, what is, the question, and ChatGPT gave me your Caribou report. So well done on your, ChatGPT SEO for that. So your report determined that 40% of current BPO tasks, especially routine ones, will be automated, and only 10% of tasks are automation proof. The reality is that most refugees have low skills. Most refugees that are working in the digital sector have lower skills, which means that they're in this category, this 40%, not in the 10% whose jobs will be displaced by technology. So what does that mean for the populations that I work with and the populations that exist out there? One thing which I find frustrating, I'm glad Mastercard Foundation is here, because training people with the skills to be, automation proof requires investment, requires a significant amount of money. If we think the money that we invest to train our children, and I always make this comparison, why are we doing this to refugees, saying, oh, $1,000 per learner is enough to make them, self-reliant? It is not possible. So how can we really invest the money that we need for refugees to actually be able to not just survive, but to thrive. Because so much of the development sector in terms of refugee livelihoods and digital livelihoods is what is good enough? What is, what can we do so we don't feel guilty? We have to move beyond that. We have to really think of the investment needed for them to contribute to the economies in which they exist. We know that most refugees stay in their host countries for at least 20 years. Many in Kenya are there. Their parents were refugees there, so they aren't going anywhere. What can we do to make sure that they can contribute to the economy equally to a Kenyan who's got financial resources behind them? So that's the first point I want to make, that, and I'm glad Samar spoke about upskilling and reskilling, hugely important. Another thing that we've seen in our work, so we're actually doing research on the gender disparities in access to skills and jobs, because everyone is talking about, we want to focus on women. Eunice, you said for Mastercard, you want to focus on 70% women. The problem is women are still disadvantaged. It's very hard for women to get the access to these skills. So at NAML, we work with highly skilled refugees, developers, designers, trying to work with those who have the ability for their jobs to be automation proof, AI proof. Yet still in our programs, we struggle to get 50% women. 40% is what we average at, and we make a huge effort to include women. It's really hard to get women to access these highest skilled training and therefore higher skill jobs. So, which is why we decided to do research, because our donors always say to us, we want to make sure that we have at least 50% women, and we could never do it. So we want to understand why. What are we missing? What are the gender? What's going on there? So we're actually doing some research on this. One of my colleagues was in Kenya a few weeks ago, and she did a few focus group discussions. We'll have a survey which we'll deploy in the next few weeks. And these focus group discussions are really interesting. As we know, we found that the refugee talent with the higher skills were much more able to find work online, to have skills which are automation proof. Those with lower skills, initially they tried working online, but then they struggled as AI displaced many of those lower skilled roles. They were not able to find work. They were not able to, to access the digital economy. And those with the lower skills, both men and women, turned to the local economy to find work, which is also fine. But what are we doing by not providing them the opportunity to upskill? One interesting thing when we asked about AI, men were less worried about the impact of AI on their jobs than women. So this is just preliminary focus of discussions. We'll do a much larger survey, but we found it interesting that men felt that they can completely upskill, ride the wave, learn, whereas women weren't so confident. So all of what we're talking about, Mastercard, 70% women, we're not reaching the women. It's not happening fast enough, because women will be the ones who will be left behind. So the report highlights many opportunities. There are opportunities, but what we need to make sure is that refugees have the skills, and not just refugees, all under-resourced communities have the skills. Are we investing the right amount of money for individuals to have the skills that they need to really become, for their jobs to be automation proof? And right now, I don't think we are.
Thank you, Lorraine. Really excellent points on what does skilling within the refugee ecosystem really mean, and what's the outcome of that? And I think it's a perfect way to bring in Patrick, with extensive experience in terms of skilling, and Patrick, based on generations' learning and experiences, how should the ecosystem rethink skills development? And Lorraine has brought up some of the nuances with that, such as gender. How should we rethink skills development and employment pathways for young people in the outsourcing sector in the age of AI?
For sure. Thanks for that. We could spend 3 hours on this alone, but I'll try and hit a few highlights. So the first one I'd say is agility, right? Both for the programs that are being run kind of across the continent and for the talent themselves. as John was saying, right, some jobs are going to be eliminated, some jobs are going to be created. The reality is we don't know which ones are going to be evolving in what way as time goes on. It's all moving so quickly. And so a really key thing is that as an ecosystem, we need to be able to monitor those changes and adapt our approaches across private, public, and social sector really quickly. It's not on a timescale of years, it's on a timescale of months or even weeks in some cases, because opportunities are coming very quickly or they're disappearing very quickly. And frankly speaking, traditional education systems are not built for that, right? I mean, this is going to be challenging for everyone, but the education sector in particular, I think is needs to dramatically rethink the way that that approach is being done. And until we reach some utopia world where secondary and tertiary institutions are able to respond quickly, it means that more of that is going to have to be augmented by TVETs, boot camps, modular skilling, other systems, other actors in the interim. And I mean, that's obviously where we as generation, try and play a big role. But then also, if you look at the talent themselves, right, career readiness is not a one and done. And so the roles that people are doing, 2 years ago are changing dramatically, and the roles that people are going to be doing tomorrow are going to change dramatically again in 2 years' time. So how do you help equip, a generation of African talent to be resilient, to have that growth mindset, to be adaptable, and that some of that happens in the skilling, what you're skilling them on, how you're approaching those, traditionally soft skills, which are, incredibly important, but that lifelong commitment to learning, but also then making those tools available and ensuring that those tools and those skilling opportunities are rooted in research-backed effective models for adult learning. And that's going to be really, really important. I mean, and I think we see some players doing it more or less in the system. Samir talked about the way in which DDD is doing that already, which is fabulous, but there's a lot of players that aren't able to. The second big point that I say is that the skilling and employment ecosystem has to be in purposeful lockstep. Skilling for skilling's sake doesn't work. It hasn't worked, and it's certainly not going to work going forward. And so whenever you're looking at an initiative, an intention, a program around skilling, it has to be really tightly linked to those work opportunities, and success needs to be measured on the basis of work opportunities, not on the basis of skilling itself, right? And so that's going to be, in order to do that, that means that skilling providers of all types need to be working incredibly closely with employers, clients, et cetera, to make sure that not only is the information flow happening, but success is actually being measured on the basis of work and incomes and those changes versus a baseline, right? And I think getting an understanding of what that baseline is challenging. And I'm not out here advocating that we should all be doing a bunch of randomized control trials, but I think particularly for those who are investing money into the ecosystem to be really mindful about the differential impact of different interventions, of different programs. It's really crucial, and it's something that I think is easy to miss when you're looking at a report with a really big headline number. And I think that is getting even more important than it has been, and that if you have that focus, it's going to drive you towards a holistic approach. Again, both at an individual level and at an ecosystem level, right? If you're only providing skilling for, and that skilling is not directly linked to the required outcomes, you're not going to get that impact number. You're not going to actually drive the outcomes that you really want to drive that are 2-3 layers deeper. You have to think about also that connection to work opportunities. You have to think about supporting those individuals with the additional infrastructure, social support, et cetera, that they need, those employment essentials. Many of these individuals, they have not worked in a white collar setting. Their family hasn't worked in a white collar setting or in knowledge-based work. And so those basic norms of how you operate in that environment, if you don't have those in place, if you don't have effective preparation in that front, they're not going to be successful. And then the last thing that I'll say is also we really have to think about the durability, both of the outcomes and in the choices that we make. So with changes happening so quickly, I think that there is a risk that you can have approaches, interventions, et cetera, that get a lot of people into very short-term work, right? Get a lot of people into, I mean, we're experimenting with programs in gig work. I think there's a role for gig work to play in a meaningful career for folks in this ecosystem. But having someone complete 1 gig on Upwork is not the same thing as having them ready for a full career. And so both measuring long-term outcomes 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, and making choices from a programmatic decision standpoint with those long-term outcomes in mind are going to be really, really important. It's not enough to say we've started someone on a path, right? We've given them those skills, because again, it's all changing. So I will pause there for now. Happy to answer any additional questions.
Really good actionable points on what skilling really means, right? Contextual skilling really means. And the last panelist on David, thinking about your work as an ecosystem builder, responsible AI and AI adoption, making sure that AI adoption protects workers and promotes fair and inclusive workplaces has really came up in the report. So I think the question to you would be, what would responsible AI look like in practice for the BPO sector? And what steps could companies take to ensure that AI adoption protects workers and promotes fair, inclusive workplaces? Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting because I'm sitting here in Livingstone, Zambia. Just before our call, I was, I'm originally from Ghana. I'm here in Zambia because I've been invited to a conference, and we just had this same conversation because Africa is waking up. Africa believes that we have to be ready for AI. The topic, for example, for today's conference is, Zambia is a copper rich country. They mine copper here, and the theme is from copper to code, leveraging on artificial intelligence for innovation. So you can imagine that a country that is originally a country that is focusing on mining of copper is beginning to shift the mindset of young people from copper to how to get into the space of artificial intelligence. And I think Africa is actually at a stage where we were 25 years ago when mobile telephony became very common in Africa. In Ghana, for example, at that time, we had only 200,000 landlines. And in the West, most homes have already telephones at home. But in Africa, we were not having mobile phones. We were not having landline. We jumped from without mobile phone to without landline to mobile phones. And for example, in Ghana now, it's over 33 million mobile telephony connectivities. So I think we are at the right point where we can embrace artificial intelligence because we have not really been involved in the BPO industry. Having only 2% of the BPO industry means that for a continent of 1.5 billion people, majority being young people, and only taking a small scratch of that ecosystem, it means we are ready to move directly from without any knowledge in BPO service straight to artificial intelligence capabilities and skills and get into the place of work. But there's a big but, which is the biases that come with AI, developing models. We have LLMs that are developed over a period of time that are not considering some of the data that is being used locally in African countries. So I think it's important for companies to begin to look at regulation in the AI space and ensure that the AI models that they are developing, the AI models that they are adopting, the AI models that they are deploying in their organizations are in line with regulation. And a lot of African countries are moving fast into this space. In Zambia here at this conference, I've just learned that they just passed a cybersecurity law. In Ghana, there's an AI, national AI strategy document that is being reviewed which is going to be passed into law. And there's already data protection and cybersecurity agencies being set across the continent. I think there's a little bit of harmonization that needs to happen to ensure that countries are able to learn from the mistakes of others that have done this earlier and correct them to ensure that they have a robust system that ensures data protection, that ensures that the AI models that are being developed are not biased, they are not keeping people's personal data. For example, if a company starts using ChatGPT and pushing people's personal data into ChatGPT to get results, then they are giving away people's personal data into the public domain. So how do we ensure that those kind of situations are not being carried out by companies? Then the other thing is data, availability of data. So far in Africa, most of the data we have now are mainly data that has not been processed or data that are in I'll say hard copy form that needs to be moved and translated and get into processed data that we can use, that we can make meaning out of. Sometimes in the process of translating this data, or what we call data processing, you get to realize that some of the time you see that some of the data that is translated or moved are not representative of what original data that has been put together look like. And again, there should be thorough review of this whilst we use this data. Otherwise, these biases will go straight into the AI models that will be used by organizations across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you to the panelists. I think we have a few minutes left, and I was hoping we could use the next few minutes for the questions. David has touched a lot on policy, ethical use of data in AI. We've had a lot about skilling, etc. So I have summarized some of the questions that are coming into the chat. And the first one is on skilling. And this one, maybe Patrick, you could take this one on. How do we prepare school pupils to have an AI-capable workforce? And Lorraine, you could also chime in since you had mentioned some skilling points. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I should flag up front that Generation typically focuses on post-school education, right? So we are predominantly, we're entirely working with adults, kind of ages 18 and above. And there are other organizations who are doing fabulous work in terms of school pupil age, adaptations to curriculum and learning modes, et cetera. I mean, I think that, one of the key things is, figure out how you can have these people have students embrace AI tools from the very beginning. Now, there are infrastructure challenges to that. There are lots of challenges associated with, finding the right balance in such a way that they're not using it to, quote unquote, cheat on exams, but they're going to be using it in the workplace. And so just in the same way that you don't, there's a period of time in which you train, young students how to do math without a calculator. And then once they reach a certain age, they're using a calculator every time, because it doesn't make any sense for them not to be using that calculator, which they would be using, above and beyond. And so I think, from a skills scaffolding perspective, I think that's a really important component. And as we think about our skilling programs, it's the same, where we say, if you're going to learn how to be a software developer, you need to learn the basics of software development without the AI tools. And then you introduce the AI tools, because you need to be a credible quality control mechanism on that tool and know when it makes sense. So that's, one thought I'd throw into the mix, but that's another question I suspect we could spend many hours on.
I agree, Patrick. So I think the next one was on an interesting one, and I think John can also take this one on how do we move from reliance on international contracts and align more to have more local BPO companies and organizations to push for more workforce in Africa?
Yeah, I think the stark reality is that international work attracts higher wages and more work. That being said, the only country on the continent that has more international work than domestic work is Egypt. And so domestic workforce is very important. Even in Kenya, where the international workforce will likely exceed the domestic workforce in the next couple of years, and you want to see that, you know, look, most startups fail, right? And if we're concerned about BPOs, I know a lot of people in the industry, right, that come out of a BPO and they say, I'm going to go start a BPO in Africa, right? You really, there needs to be a centralized place for what I would call local operator capacity building on the continent. Sharing best practices in the absence of, these are not businesses that are venture capital ready. They are friends and family ready, right? If you're, you know, if your uncle can put in, you know, $50,000 into your business and take a piece of equity of it, great. But a lot of these businesses are not at the point where they have the certifications, experience, ETC, as we say in Kenya, right? That is going to allow them to even they can't hit the InfoSec requirements for a German company that wants to outsource XYZ, right? This is the problem. So it's a gating factor. It's a very expensive initiative to do what I would call venture building on the continent, but there is domestic demand that, you know, you don't need that, you know, all those certifications, you know, to do. And I think there needs to be better. So KEPSA in Kenya comes to mind, like could be an organization where it's alerting the local businesses and SMEs of the value of tech outsourcing that may or may not have a lot of adoption yet. I'd be interested to hear David's comments and how the domestic market functions in Ghana as well. So banks, telcos, they would be the most likely, you know, to use domestic workforce. It's a great way to get work experience. Work experience is the key here. As Patrick said, you want durable jobs. You want people who have this sort of basket of soft skills that they know how to do the prompts, they know how to manage people, they know how to work with a boss, etc. So.
Thank you. David, if you don't mind, you could keep it to 1 minute because we're almost on time on the Ghana ecosystem.
Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely start with domestic, as John mentioned. But also, I think one important thing we need is we need change agents. You know, change agents are professional bodies, university, regulatory organizations that will ensure that, you know, the society is shifting from the traditional ways of doing things into AI-enabled kind of learning and development. So these change agents are important. In Ghana, we have professional bodies like the Institute of ICT Professionals. Pan-African level, we have TICON Africa, which is a Pan-African ICT association. But change agents should be part of the whole process of mindset change and development. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more really interesting question in the chat and then we'll wrap it up. I know we're almost at time. There's a question on AI impact. How does AI impact wage structures and compensation models? I don't know who'd like to take that one. That's a tough one.
I could take a shot at it. I mean, I think the bigger trend here is we're seeing the demand for solutions rather than just like, I want 10 agents for this many hours. It's more, you know, if companies, wages fall from the way that a company's, you know, productization is done, right? So if a company's just selling solutions, then it may be that work is a little bit more episodic and you're involved in creating a solution for a client and you're completely obfuscated from from working with the end client. You're just working on the solution. And then the company has to then decide how do you compensate for something like that. That's maybe a 3-month thing. Not to say that it's a gig, but again, like you're just seeing this trend now with companies are buying outcomes. They're not buying hours.
Yeah, great point. Okay, we are at time. I think it's been quite an interesting discussion. If you're interested to talk to one of the panels, please reach out and we'd be happy to answer any questions offline. I'd like to say a really big thank you to the panelists. It's been quite an interesting conversation, such diverse points of views on culture, change, rethinking skilling, thinking about how to measure skilling outcomes, thinking about policy, thinking about wages, different discussion points. I'd like to say a really big thank you. Like to encourage all of you who have not read the report, please interact with the report and you can reach out if you have any further questions. But yeah, have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone.